First, Tom Holland worked to break out of his Marvel role with The Devil All the Time, and now he's at it again in Cherry, the new Apple TV Plus original movie. Should this one be on your watch list? An army medic suffering from PTSD becomes a serial bank robber after an addiction to drugs puts him in debt. Tom Holland plays the title character in this dark drama from the Russo brothers. Now, there's a lot of this movie that has sort of an avant-garde type of feel to it. It's artsy and even a bit strangely shot at times. I mean, sometimes it looks like the movie is shot on a phone, and despite not liking that part at all, I did love how close up and personal some of the shots are. We're super close to the characters and it's pretty intimate, but there are other times where it looks like portrait mode is on when taking a picture. I mean, the characters are mostly in focus and everything else around them is wildly blown out. And the depth of field is just crazy and it's unnatural looking. But that type of shot only happens a couple of times towards the beginning of the movie. And it felt strange while it was happening, but then it was even stranger when it wasn't repeated later on. The film then continues to vary up its framings and shot choices, and while variety can be cool, it's also distracting to have so many different views coming at you in one movie. So the story opens at the end, kind of like Harry's golden snitch, and then it takes us back to the beginning to tell Cherry's story. The entire film is told in chapters similar to the book that it's based on. Speaking of which, I haven't read the book, so I'm very curious at how closely these two stories really do line up. We watch Cherry go from college where he meets Emily and he falls in love. We see him listlessly go throughout his days, no real direction or goals. Next is his time in the army where he becomes a medic and sees way too much action and horrific things that obviously cause distress. After coming back, he falls into addiction, which spirals his life out of control, and eventually the need for drugs gets him desperate for cash and he starts robbing banks. Now I know that's a simplified overview of this 2-hour and 20-minute movie, and each sequence has so many facets that draw out small characteristics from Holland. We get to see a wanting desire from Cherry mixed with this directionless wandering during the first chapter. We then watch him transition to a scared medic who gains a fierceness and hopelessness while in the middle of the desert in wartime. And finally, we see a desperate hunger that turns into acceptance during the last half of the story. Now, Holland is really good in this. He gets to be the complete opposite of his Marvel character, and I think he pulls it off well. But it's not just enough to play a rough or bad guy to break out of previous roles. He has to be convincing in it, and I bought the change. The look in his eyes, the twitches, tiny mouth movements, I mean, everything works together to deliver a genuine feeling hurting addict. He also breaks the fourth wall in this, which I wasn't expecting, and so it was jarring at first, but I really ended up enjoying when he'd address us directly. As Cherry speaks to us, we get to hear his inner thoughts. He's letting us in on those private secrets he doesn't share with anybody else, which also then caused me to connect with him more, and I could even feel a certain sympathy with him at times. In addition to Holland, I really enjoyed Sierra Bravo as Emily and Jack Rayner as Pills and Coke. Bravo gives a really strong performance, but it's heartbreaking to watch her descend into addiction. Something I also enjoyed in this is the score. The orchestra is phenomenal, I think, and carries the emotion just throughout the story. There are several parts that have minimal to no dialogue, and the swells of music, at those points, they just sucked me in. Obviously, based on the subject matter, this is going to have a more serious tone to it. I'd say it's not only serious, but pretty depressing too. The content is really heavy, and there were large portions of time where I felt that I was enduring the story more than I was enjoying it. The continued oppressive heaviness does weigh on you, and it does take its toll over the course of the movie. I thought the way that they used color, and even the lack of color, was pretty unique. At one point when Cherry is high, his whole view is washed out and pale, and as he begins to talk with Emily, color slowly fades back into his view. It's as if his world begins again once he connects with the girl he likes. Now, in addition to the unique uses of color, there are multiple scenes where they employ longer shots, and some of them were combined with really up-close framings. One scene shows Holland and friends get picked up in a car, and as everybody gets into the car and has their discussion, the camera follows each enter and then circles around inside to capture their conversations. I thought this was really effective, even though it was a bit disarming at first. As compelling as the narrative is, there's a slowness to the movie that I really felt. It's not a slowness that causes boredom necessarily, but some scenes do play out way longer than they should, which then made me feel the time. These slower parts also work against the story because we begin to focus more on the issues and less on the characters with the issues. The behaviors aren't glorified, but it's also not a cautionary tale. We just watch the deterioration of characters, and it's not a subtle thing. There's really a lot going on in this story, and I think ultimately they just try and pack too much in, which only further hinders the overall execution. Again, I'd really like to know if this is because of the source material or if this is just the directing choices. There are some fun little visual plays on names that are used, and because they're subtle, I found them to be kind of funny. Like there's a Dr. Whomever that Cherry visits, and one of the banks is called Bank F's America. And there are others that you can see if you're actually looking. I think though that despite solid performances from Holland, Bravo, and Rayner, the story drags on too long and it just feels too choppy with the large amount of varying camera choices. And when that's combined with a story that becomes less about the characters and more about their issues, it just loses the effectiveness and the enjoyment overall. So if you enjoy darker stories or you're a fan of Tom Holland, but you're looking for something different than his Peter Parker persona, you might want to check this one out. Just know that it will weigh on you, and you may need to watch a comedy after to pull you out of the bell jar. There is sex, brief nudity with a lot of profanity and violence. I give Cherry 3.5 out of 5 couches. So do you have a favorite movie that others find dark and depressing? Let me know what that is in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for catching with me.